Hello, I am Mariana Bolfarine. I am vice-coordinator of the William Butler Yeats Chair of Irish Studies, and I'm here with Paula Santiago Soares, who is an MA candidate at the University of São Paulo, and we're here to interview the Irish writer and folklorist Éilís Ní Dhuibhne, who was born in Dublin and educated at University College Dublin, where she completed a PhD on the relationship between oral and written narrative. She also attended the University of Copenhagen as a research scholar, and she began publishing short stories in 1974, and she released her first collection, Blood and Water, in 1988. Since then, she has authored over 25 books, including novels, short stories, children's literature, drama, and nonfiction, writing both in Irish and in English. Her work has been widely translated and anthologized, and she is recognized as a major voice in contemporary Irish literature. She has held academic positions as a creative writing lecturer at UCD, writer fellow at Trinity College Dublin, and Burns Scholar at Boston College. She has received numerous awards, was elected to Osdana in 2004, and she serves as an ambassador for the Irish Writers Centre. She is also president of the Folklore of Ireland Society and was appointed laureate for Irish fiction by the Arts Council in 2025. Éilís, is really such a joy to have you here in Brazil for the second time at the Irish Corner at the University of São Paulo. So Paula, please.
Okay, I will start the first question. I'll start the first question. Well, Éilís, besides being a renowned author with numerous published books, including short story collections, novels, plays, and children's books, you're also a folklorist. So starting with this area of folklore, how and when did you first came into contact with this field, and what made you decide to pursue it?
Well, I came into contact with folklore studies in University College Dublin when I was an undergraduate student of English. I studied what we called pure English, Old and Middle and Modern English, because I wanted to be a writer, and I thought the best way of doing it was to read absolutely everything that had been written in English, not in Irish. But then I, in my second year in UCD, an optional course, what we now call an elective module, was offered in the folktale and medieval literature. And I remember the professor of Old and Middle English said, "You'll be interested in this, Éilís, because your name is in Irish." And so very stereotypical view of, if your name is in Irish, you're going to be interested in folklore stuff. So, but he was right actually, and I took that module, which was about the folktale and medieval literature, and looked at analogues to medieval texts like the Canterbury Tales and Robert Henryson, the Scottish poets' poems, and so on. So analogues to these, to many of the stories, say in the Canterbury Tales, were to be found in Irish folklore and had been collected by the Irish Folklore Commission. So, as for our undergraduate work, we compared the oral versions of the stories that had been collected in the 20th century, mostly after 1935, and were archived in what is now the National Folklore Archive in UCD. We compared them to the medieval texts, and yeah, so that's how I got started. And it was a total eye-opener to me that that these folk tales existed, and that written literature like Beowulf or the Táin in Irish had actually been, that there was a much earlier layer of oral literature there, and that was in a way the roots of writing and of imagination. So I got quite fascinated by this study. I really loved it, so, and I kept at it then for MPhil and PhD. I was in UCD for a long time, though usually working in jobs as well, while I was doing the PhD. Anyway, that's how it started.
Okay, Paul and I were thinking about how in Brazil the field of folklore is quite stagnant nowadays in several aspects. Firstly, due to limited institutional interest and even support, financial support to this kind of study, especially in higher education, in undergraduate and postgraduate studies. So if you could share with us a little bit about your experience as a researcher, which you have said, you just mentioned something on this, but also as a teacher, as a creative writing instructor. And what is the importance for folklore studies in this contemporary world we live in?
Well, it's sad that it's no longer being taught in Brazil, but that sadly is the situation in many other countries as well. For instance, as you mentioned in your lovely introduction, I spent a year studying in the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. I was doing my PhD then, but there was a folklore institute, a very good one, in the University of Copenhagen, but that no longer exists. It's becoming less fashionable, or the departments that teach folklore and specialise in it are becoming fewer and fewer. Too bad. But why should they keep? Why should they be maintained? Well, I found when I was lecturing in creative writing in UCD, I introduced a module called The Archive of Imagination. I use this word imagination quite a lot in my titles. And for that, we used to, my MA class of typically 14, 16 students, we would visit the archive and look at folk tales, and they would write something inspired by them, and they found that it worked extremely well. First, they were usually astonished that this wonderful archive existed, even though they were in the colleges. Somehow it wasn't that well known, and but secondly, they found the stories quite, triggered something in their imagination. So that definitely is one reason for writers and students of literature to pay attention to it. And a use it has in the modern world. And in Ireland, writers, I see some of them up there in the poster, autores de fiction and maybe the poesia more, have visit our National Archive, the National Folklore Collection, and use the material and find inspiration. Claire Keegan does, for instance, the great Irish language poet Nuala Ní Dhomhnaill. Her whole oeuvre really is inspired by folklore, and she found it very. I remember she told me once she found it inspired. She found just the manuscripts, because the material in our archive, as in most of them actually, was collected with sound recording equipment, first Ediphones, then tape recorders, but transcribed into usually by hand, in handwriting, and there's a collection of, I don't know, I should know the exact number, but several hundred of these volumes. And Nuala said she found just touching the manuscripts inspiring, but of course what she used was the content. But so for creative writing, I think it's important. I think for scholarship, literary studies, when I was a student of English, we were reading Beowulf and Chaucer and so on in the Old and Middle English component of the course, and not a word was said ever about the folklore basis of a lot of these texts. So it was only by specialising in folklore that I found that out, and I think that is something that we folklore scholars just accept as a given, that literary people are not interested in it and don't really know anything much about it, but they should. For the greater society, it's part of our history, it is the origins of literature. If you want to find out what people were like, how they were creating stories and poems and everything in the pre-literate society, that's where you go.
Okay, well, turning now to literature. Well, last year, as Mariana mentioned, you were nominated for the Laureate for Irish Fiction, and a well-deserved honor, if you might say so. And the overarching theme of your laureateship is the Island of Imagination. Could you tell us a little about your choice for this theme and what are your goals during your laureateship?
Yeah, well, one of the roles of the laureate is to encourage interest in contemporary Irish literary fiction, and there's some obligations that come with the role, to give one public lecture every year, visit certain universities and do some workshops, do media presentations and a few other things like that. But otherwise it's left up to the laureate herself or himself to decide what to do. So the previous laureate, who was Colm Tóibín, took as his theme reading. I think the art of reading was his theme. Anna Enright took the short story, and yeah, they asked me for the theme and the title of my laureateship very quickly after asking me if I would be a laureate. So I didn't have an awful lot of time to come up with something. And yeah, I thought the Island of Imagination, that I said I'd go around to every county in Ireland. There are 26 counties in the Republic of Ireland. The North of Ireland isn't included, though I'm going there too a few times. But and I would talk to writers in those counties about literature from the counties. And I had thought the legacy, the historical literature and so on, but mostly so far I've been talking to contemporary writers about their own work. So I go to Kilkenny or Cork or Wexford, and I meet a writer from that or a couple of writers, and we do one of these interviews about their writing. County Meath I went to, where actually, and I think this is of interest to Brazil, because Oisin Fagan has written a novel, a very young writer, probably about 30 or so. His novel is called Eden's Shore, I think, and it's a historical Gothic crazy novel, but it involves Brazil. Eden is Brazil. Yeah. It doesn't turn out
like a high
it doesn't
Brazil.
turn out well. Yeah, I think high Brazil has come into it.
Mythology of
yeah.
that island where everyone is happy, there's no sickness,
Yeah,
there are no
yeah,
illnesses,
yeah.
and
He may
a lot of
paradise.
nature.
He may refer to it, yeah, but of course in the novel it doesn't actually.
It's not like that.
No. But it's a lot of it is located in imagined Brazil.
Oh, wow. Okay, so Éilís, in some of your interviews you have declared yourself to be a feminist, and that you write from this feminist perspective with the voices and stories of female characters. When reading your stories, we find Irish female experiences, we come in contact with these experiences, but also universal ones, so Irish and these feelings that go beyond the Irish experience. How does your creative process, your choice of themes work from this perspective? Well,
when I started writing or publishing in 1974, I was born in 1954. I had no real ideas. I didn't know anything about feminism, and I just wrote whatever way I wanted to write, including on a few occasions I wrote in the voice of a male voice, And I did that for some years. But then in the 1980s, I discovered feminism and literary feminism and so on, thanks to a great woman in UCD, Alva Smith, who had set up something called the Women's Studies Forum, just a bunch of women academics and a couple of writers who came together and discussed the impact of feminism, or the lack of impact of feminism on literature. And then I realised, like a lot of other people at the time in Ireland, that in fact our literature, the literary history and the literary scene was male dominated. It still was very much in the 1980s. All the big writers, of course, are that you hear about, Joyce and Yeats and all the rest of them are men, but it was still like that. And men were the literary editors in newspapers. They were the editors of publishing houses, all that. So then that's when I started writing from a female point of view. I realised the men, anyone can, there are lots of men who are able to express the male point of view, and they've been doing that for centuries, so that there was a reason to write about women's lives. And at that period in Ireland, the 80s into the 90s, there was a recognition generally that the women's voice was lacking more or less in Irish literature. Of course, that's a very sweet statement, and we know there were women writers, of course, before then, but there was a welcome for women's voices. There were initiatives designed to encourage women to write, something called the National Women's Writers' Workshop, which I did sometime in the middle of the 80s with other women, many of whom are still my good friends, and publishing houses, I suppose most importantly, were established to publish with the aim of publishing only women's writing. So Arlen House was the first one, and then Attic Press was the second one, and in end of the 1970s, and they were based on Virago, the same ideas, the very much more famous, I suppose, Virago Press in London, which was reissuing, isn't that? Yeah, reissuing. Well, they reissued books novels by women from the 30s and so on, like Elizabeth Taylor and people like that, and the other Elizabeth Taylor, and and so it was very much in the zeitgeist in the 80s for women to write, but also to write about women's experiences. So I suppose, that's how that happened.
But that would also be a response to the field day anthology, and then...
Yeah, well, the field day, yes, the great debacle of the field day anthology. When is that? 1991. That this wonderful, big, fat, 3-volume anthology of Irish writing was published by the Field Day group based in Derry, with big names like Seamus, big men, Seamus Heaney, Seamus Dean, Brian Free, no women really came out, and there was, when it was, and it's a compendium of extracts and pieces and essays about Irish literature from the year dot up to the 1990s, and one of the sections in particular, the poetry section, there were hardly any women at all in it. So there was a huge big Furorian scandal, and I was at the meeting in the Irish Writers' Centre where Seamus Dean came along, as I recall, and Evan Boland was very much a protester about that, although she was included because she was the token woman almost, very well
representative
known.
of
Yeah. But she objected to what had happened, and Elvis Smith, of course, and people like that. And Seamus Dean infamously said, "We just forgot."
The rapt of the kidney, which
brought the wrath of all the women writers of Ireland down on his head. Anyway, subsequently, two new extra volumes, also big, very substantial, were edited and published
by women and
by women. The editors were women, and I contributed on the International Folktale, and I'm there in many bits and pieces of it. So those volumes included were dedicated, devoted to work by Irish women writers. So it was a correction, and I think it is probably true to say that volumes 4 and 5, the women's ones, have made more of an impact and been more used more
read.
Than that, more read really than the other. That's the I would think so.
Well, still on this theme, considering the changes in women's experiences both in Ireland and globally, from when you started writing until now, how do you observe these changes, both from the perspective of a fiction author and also from the perspective of a researcher of an area that looks to the past?
Okay, well, feminism was one of the movements which changed attitudes to everything in literature and in research and scholarship in Ireland. As well as real life. So if we look at the real life situation in Ireland in the 1970s, contraception was not legal. That wasn't even legal. Abortion, obviously not legal. Divorce was banned. There was no right to divorce. Women who worked in the public service, civil servants, teachers were exempted from this somehow. They had to resign from their jobs when they married. In 1972-73, Ireland joined the what's now called the European Union. It was called the Common Market, or the EEC then. And one of the first things that happened was that the so-called marriage bar in the civil service went, because Europe would not stand for that. So women have a lot to thank the EU for. And then gradually, as people probably know, but over a long period, the contraception became legal sometime in the 1980s. Divorce, 1998, quite late, and most recently abortion, not just a few years ago really. And also we had the gay marriage referendum, and that passed by a substantial majority in Ireland. That's about 2015 or 16 or so. And so you can see the enormous change that happened in society from the 70s when I started writing to now. Everything has changed, and Ireland has gone from being, I suppose, people used to talk about Ireland, now this was not correct, as the third world, but we were a poor nation, and now we're one of the richest countries in Europe. So the economy changed as well. So that all, I think, is part of the picture. As far as research and teaching in the universities and that is concerned, everything has changed as well. Like when I was studying English way back 71, 74, the only women on the course, the syllabus, were Emily Dickinson, Emily Bronte, and Jane Austen, of course. She's always on. Yeah, she's always there. But there were no. I think it's true that there were no Irish women writers at all, or that was it. And I didn't really notice this, but now, of course, they have modules on many aspects of women's writing and so on, and it's mandatory to think about the inclusion, to having a balance in male-female when you're teaching, and research even in the area of folklore too became quite folklore scholars began to look at the role of women storytellers and narrators in the traditional, in the Irish oral tradition, because again, surprise, surprise, in the traditional Irish storytelling communities, the main storytellers were men, and an awful lot of the material which was collected by the Irish Folklore Commission, which was established in 1935 to collect the folklore of Ireland, which was a great initiative. It employed 7 or 8 full-time collectors, all men of course, and they did collect from women, some great storytellers, but an awful lot of the stuff came from men. So we began to study all that and do comparisons and statistical reports and so on. For instance, what we're talking about here at this conference, the Feniac or the Oceanic cycle in Irish oral tradition, these are, I suppose, they're hero tales. I think you could describe them as women were not supposed to tell those stories at all. I mean, that was gender discrimination imposed by the people on storytellers. I'm not sure why they. But in fact, some women did tell the stories and they knew them even if they didn't tell them. So again, we began to investigate all that sort of thing. And the writing scene has just changed dramatically, absolutely dramatically and exponentially since the 1970s. There used to be, most writers of novels and poetry, drama, still dominated by men for some reason, were made in the 1970s and the 1980s. But now, in the 21st century, there are more women writing fiction than men, which is resented by some men.
Resenting, that's quite, something. Okay, so Eilís, when we read some of your short stories, such as Inland Eyes, published in 1997, and Little Red, more recently in 2020, we see these 2 female characters facing issues around aging. So Polly considers herself, aging, and she's not yet 50. I'm not yet 50, and we're sharing the same kind of experience, but expecting to retire at 65. But while Fiona is 64, she is still working, and sometimes she refers to herself as an older woman, but she has decided to join a dating website and goes on dates with men. So we were thinking about this shift in how aging is actually conceived and seen and written about and read about.
Yeah, that's a very interesting observation. I suppose the Polly seeing herself as getting old when she's 50 reflects probably my own feeling about myself when I was that age, because I think people, you think you're getting old when you're 50, you think you're getting old when you're 60, then you become 70 and you think you're really getting old until you meet somebody who's, but I think you're right. Attitudes to age are changing, and one thing that is happening is that I think age and old age has become a theme in scholarship. So it's a field, yes, So last year, the year before, a couple of years ago, it's recent really. I and was involved in a project with a professor of German actually, but age is her topic, is her theme, what she's interested in. I was involved in a project on age, which involved discussion groups with women. They defined age actually as from 50. One of the people in my workshop, one of the women in my workshop was 50, and then at the other end there was somebody aged 88. There was quite a broad wide range of ages in this workshop on aging, and yeah, they discussed for instance representations of age in film and in advertising and in literature, particularly sometimes in advertising it's very negative. You know, there were particular advertisements in Ireland about mortgaging your house, and they seem to be so the granny is depicted like the granny in a Red Riding Hood or something, not, you know, very old looking, and she's sold her house, I think, so her son and his family can buy a house, or they're coming anyway. They bring her to a room which they have decorated like a sitting room out of the 1950s. And this isn't very clear, you have to see the ad, but those and hands are often used in ads. We discovered an awful lot of advertisements or even articles in newspapers about anything related to age. They'll often have a photograph of a very wrinkled and wizened hand. So I think people are becoming much more conscious of these stereotypes and objecting to them. And in my workshops, we wrote about the experience of aging and so on. And then we edited a collection of poems and stories and essays called Well, You Don't Look at Irish Women Writers Reflect on Aging. It was published maybe 2 years ago. The essays are very good. Mary O'Donnell has a brilliant, wonderful essay in it, and Catherine Dunn and various other people. I think I was editing it, so I just included my story, that one you refer to, Little Red, in it. But yeah, it's of interest. I think people, older people, one of the things that came up in the discussion groups I now remember is that men and women in broader, they don't always want to retire when they're 65, and some of them, especially people who are in professions like medicine or law, say, I'm not going to retire, I'm just going to keep working. And of course writing is one of those jobs that you can keep doing for as long as you're able, which is a great thing. But I think that's become more acceptable.
Yes.
But we're not I'm really impressed by how older people are treated in Brazil. And you know, at the airport, you get priority.
Yes, you get
just
priority.
because you have grey hair. So
yes,
it's wonderful.
It's over 60.
It's over 60.
Yes.
Yeah.
On buses, on
Yeah.
lines
You
in
get free.
general.
Yeah, it's very nice. Yes.
Well, now as regards to your creative writing process, we see a lot of mixture of folklore and contemporary, and we were wondering what comes first, like the folktale inspires the story, or you think of a theme, something inspires you, and then you relate to the folktale?
Yeah, that's a good. I think it both of those things happen. Sometimes I take a folktale and decide to write version, use it as a trigger for a contemporary story with some of the themes and motifs and ideas that are in the folktale. But on other occasions, the contemporary story would come first. So I think in my story, say Midwife to the Fairies, the contemporary story was first, and then I thought I can enhance this by including the legend of Midwife to the Fairies in the story. Maybe in the Inland Ice, where I thread folktale through the whole collection of stories, the stories came first, and then I thought that I could use the folktale as a sort of commentary. So I think the contemporaries, the new stories, in a way, are a comment of a kind on the traditional legend, that they throw light on it and what it might mean or how it could be interpreted, and vice versa.
Éilís, on creative writing, so you are here at your second visit at the University of São Paulo. Yesterday you taught a workshop on creative writing, and you have also taught, as you were a lecturer of creative writing at UCD for many years. What kind of advice you would give aspiring writers in terms of the pitfalls that they should avoid in their writing process and when seeking to publish their work?
Well, yeah, for the pitfalls, I would think in the writing process, one of the pitfalls is doubting yourself and censoring yourself as you go along. So don't do that. Allow yourself the freedom to write badly. So what if you write badly? It doesn't matter. And because you will learn, you get better at writing by writing. It's like anything else. You get better at playing the piano if you play the piano. You don't get better by sitting around thinking, I'll never be a pianist, or reading the theory about it. You have to keep doing it. So if you want to do it, and trust yourself, and don't be put off by don't compare yourself to people whom you perceive as being more successful and better than you. There are always going to be more successful people and less successful people. So forget about that. When it comes to so keep doing it. Keep reading, reading good literature, classics and contemporary literature, and keep writing on a fairly regular basis. A pitfall, apart from self-censorship, is lack of. You have to make the time to do it. You're never going to. Time is never going to come to you and say, "Here I am." Sit down and write. You're going to be very busy with your life, with your work, with all the other things that there are to do. So give yourself the luxury of an hour a day, or an hour on a couple of days a week, or on a Saturday afternoon, or whatever you can squeeze into your busy schedule to actually write, because it's crucial. And letting it go and not doing it for a month or 2 months that's a pitfall, I think. With everything, but especially with the novel, but with everything. And publishing, I don't know what the pitfalls are, of course. Don't be dejected by rejection. I regret, it's happened with a few novels that I've written even, that if 1 or 2 publishers didn't take them, I just dumped them, really. And I realise now that was very stupid. Because of course we're always hearing these stories about somebody who sent their novel out 100 times and then they won the Booker Prize. So it happens, but I think give yourself a fair chance. So a reasonable chance. So I think a pitfall would be expecting acceptance and success very quickly. I think you can make a plan. I'll see if 10 publishers don't want it, well maybe. And another pitfall would be getting stuck at that point, move on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, talking about the current events of the world, we live in a time which we have been facing a lot of changes and crises, such as the COVID pandemic, and now we have a lot of discussions surrounding AI. Have you written, or do you think, or do you intend about writing something on these subjects?
I find it very hard to predict what will happen with AI, but my thoughts about it, I haven't written anything. My thoughts about it, which are probably tending to be optimistic, are that I don't believe that AI can replicate literary writing, because I mean, we saw when we were reading, say, the John McGarren story Gold Watch the other day, there's so much contained in a good piece of literary fiction, so much emotion, so much the skill. I think AI can do. It can write a text, a story with a plot and characters and so on, but I don't think it can get all that deeper meaning that comes from the writer's subconscious to some extent. I don't think AI can, for instance, dream, which is a very significant part of how we write, with, to some extent, I think, with the part of our consciousness that dreams, or the subconscious. And I've also been, so I don't foresee the end of literary fiction. I presume that AI can do a kind of flat detective novel. That's not true, because some detective novels and thrillers and so on are much more interesting and deeper than that, and there's a lot of the personality of the writer in them, but surely it can do something. But I also have been thinking about using food as an analogy. In the kind of society we live in the Western world, developed world, you can get everything you need to eat in the supermarket. You don't really, tins of beans and ready cooked food and so on. You don't actually need to cook anything to survive. But we still cook. We like to cook mostly. We treasure, we value food that is cooked. The food we value most is, 3-star Michelin restaurants where a chef is painstakingly producing a dish, and people pay enormous sums of money to eat. Say a restaurant like this very famous one called Noma in Copenhagen, where they forage for wild plants and seaweed and shrimps from the rock pool and so on. And there's a waiting list of 2 years or something to get a table at this highly expensive restaurant. So I think people will value writing, good writing. I do. I know it's harder maybe to read a book than to eat a meal, but I think that analogy may give us food for thought and a reason for optimism. And I also think that writers will want to write. Whatever compels us to write. We're not really, when we start writing as teenagers or in our youth, immediately thinking of who's going to read this. We don't really. It's a form of creativity. It's art. It's self-expression. So I don't think they're going to stop doing it just because a machine is able to produce a text.
Exactly. Yes, prompting and
Yeah, I think we can go to our last question.
You can go ahead, Paula. Yes, of course.
Well, to conclude our interview, Irish studies, especially literary studies here in Brazil, have grown a lot in the last years. We have here at the University of São Paulo the Chair of Irish Studies. And for those that want to delve deeper into this area, we would like to ask you for some of your recommendations, must-read works from traditional classics and also contemporary Irish literature.
Yeah, well, in the classics, obviously, I think for Irish literature in English, you have to read the usual suspects, Joyce, Yeats, and so on. I think it's also a good idea to read Sean O'Casey's plays to give an insight into the almost the origins of independent Ireland. He's writing about that in a play like The Plough and the Stars and so on. I think the mid-century writers, Flann O'Brien, I see him over there, Brian O'Nolan, who used the Phoenix cycle very much in At Swim Two Birds, that one of his really very original and somewhat neglected novels. I think that's one that should be read. I think the stories of Sean O'Faolain, Frank O'Connor and Mary Lavin, the mid-century story writers, and some of the more neglected novelists of especially the women novelists, people like Nora Holt and Elizabeth O'Connor, Una Troy, and you can get some of this material easily in anthologies like The Long Days Back, isn't that the Sinead Gleeson one, where she brings together historical material as well as some contemporary novelists, writers, short story writers. On the contemporary scene, this is more dangerous territory, I think. Well, Anne Enright, clearly, Claire Keegan, who's such a fantastic short story writer, Sally Rooney as an example of an almost new young phenomenon in recent phenomenon in Irish fiction. Poets like Mona Groark, who's the present poet laureate, as it were, Professor of Ireland Poetry in Ireland, Evan Boland, classic, I suppose, Mary O'Donnell. There's so much material out there, but yeah, you did ask for must reads, so Colin Tobin, Elizabeth Bowen, classic, I see her over there. Absolutely. William Trevor, I mean, probably the best short story writer we ever had, and really, since he died, maybe not all that long ago, you don't hear about him so much. He's a must, especially if you're writing short stories.
Okay. Yes, I think we are a bit on time. But just, I think that Priscilla asked a question the other day about the Russians and about how you are also inspired by like Anna Karenina. And I think this is an important question to ask. How does that work apart from the folk tales, and how does this, this rewriting, classic, especially from like the Russian tradition?
Yeah, well, I wanted, I suppose, I've written versions of, I've done a version of Chekhov's The Lady with the Dog as well, one of the stories, and maybe that's it. I think I wanted the Anna Karenina one, I wanted to write a novel about Celtic Tiger Ireland, our last big boom, which critics, people like Finch O'Toole and so on, were saying nobody has written about Celtic Tiger Ireland. Isn't really true, but I mean, any of these statements are never completely true, because you'll always find, yeah, somebody has written about them, and maybe there are short stories and they tend to be completely overlooked when literary critics are talking. But I thought I would like to do one, and but I needed a storyline, and I must have been reading Tolstoy at the time, and it surprised me I'd always liked Anna Karenina. I was surprised to realise that his great novel War and Peace was a historical novel for Tolstoy. He wasn't around in 1812 during the Napoleonic Wars when that novel is set. And when he had finished it, he wanted to write a contemporary novel which would satirize society in Moscow and St. Petersburg, high society, and he wrote Anna Karenina. So I thought I'll satirize the Celtic Tiger and write a Dublin Anna Karenina, and I use the, and I don't know, we don't really have high society in the Russian sense, end of the 19th century sense in Ireland, that at least I don't have access to it. So I based it in the literary scene, really largely in Ireland, and I thought I was satirizing that a bit, and so it gave me, it's easier when you have the storyline there from somebody else, and then you can make it your own. And I wanted, it's called Fox Swallow Scarecrow,
exactly,
right? But I wanted to call it Anna Kelly Sweeney.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that would have been a better title. But
no, I don't think
this
so.
is a
I'm not
okay,
sure.
it's not as poetic, obviously.
But it's
but
more elusive. It's
okay,
more, interactive.
yeah. Oh, good. Well, the publisher. Well, this is one of the things that you come up against actually as a writer. My publisher editor didn't like that title, and they said no, if we put Anna Kelly Sweeney, they'll think Anna Kelly Sweeney was the author of the book and so on. Yeah. So but I thought that would have been a good kind of riff on Anna Karen, because sometimes I call her Anna Karenina. Yeah, but yeah, so it was called Fox, but that's how it came about. And because I suppose as a short story writer, I'm not a great plotter. I'm not a plotter. Yeah. So I need to find my plot line somewhere, and sometimes I get it in the folk tales because they are plotted. And in this case, I got it from Leo Tolstoy.
Okay, Eilís, thank you so much. Thank you, Priscilla, Paula, and I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you. And I should say finally thanks to everyone, Mariana and Paula and Laura and Priscilla and all the girls as far
all the girls.
Laura, all the girls, and there have been some boys as well, of course, for all your kindness and help and hospitality while I'm here in Brazil. It's really great.
Thank you, Eilís, for your time.